We're welcoming Mr. Jeff Sacktig to our virtual summer band today. And Mr. Sacktig has written our drill, well, now for 1 year, but has written drill for many, many, many marching bands over the years and some really, really famous drum corps. So I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about, his background and the things that he may want to share with you before I blab all the way over the whole thing. So Mr. Sacktig, welcome, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Yes. Hello, everybody in Round Rock Nation. Yeah, hey, I see some waves. Good to see you guys. Yeah, I'm honored to be the visual designer for Round Rock this past year, and a little sad that we are not going to do the traditional marching band thing this fall, but we do have something really special planned for you. My background, started, I was involved in the pageantry arts in drum corps. I started at the age of 9 years old. And it was by default. My parents were met in the activity in the 40s, and they kind of said when it was time for me to do that, they grabbed me and said, "You're joining. You have no choice." So and he put a brass instrument in my hand. That time it was a bugle, and I was off. I mean, I was shy at the time. I really didn't want any part of it. But I guess what I found from it all is the sense of community, the sense of togetherness of people that all like and share a common goal. I just enjoyed the atmosphere. It was different from school for me. It was a different environment. School, it was rigid. You were in a classroom. You were learning. There was curriculum. This had a social thing and a growth. There was a lot of kids my own age, so I really enjoyed it. And it kind of stuck with me. So I always kind of had that drive to be better at playing my instrument. So I used to practice all the time. I would never put it down. It was something that, my parents got upset with me because they said, "You have to put that horn back in the case," because I just used to leave it out. And every time I passed it, I would pick it up and I would play it, and I would play some exercises. I would learn music by listening. I would listen to charts. And I didn't read music right away because that kind of wasn't the times. You kind of learn by rote. You would kind of listen to somebody and you mimic it. We learned as we went, and as I got a little bit older, we understood how to read music and understood what that was, and that got better. But a lot of it was listening. And I'm sure you guys now listen. And I would think that even some of the popular tunes you listen on the radio and stuff, you can probably play some of those things. And that was always the interesting thing for me, is that I can mimic and I can play something that I heard. And then I just kept playing and playing. I got my background education. I went to school for mathematics in college and computer science, and that was kind of be my path. I always had kind of drum corps in the background. I marched since I was 9 years old. I marched in back then there was small church organizations in the Northeast. Every little church had a drum corps, which was a couple
That's amazing. Yeah, you never find that now.
No, it's different now, but that's kind of how it was, So I grew up through that, and then I marched in a senior drum and bugle corps because my older brothers and sisters moved on to that after the one I was in kind of folded. And I did that for a couple of years, and I decided I wanted to jump into the bigger arena with a DCI drum corps. And I joined the Garfield Cadets in 1986. That sounds like a long time. All you guys were born probably in the 2000s, right? So I marched there for 4 years. And again, I was going to college. I did well in school. I was on my way to being, involved as a computer programmer or involved in the mathematics side as a statistician or an actuary or things of that nature. Numbers and science were kind of my thing. But out of necessity, I ended up teaching drum corps because I had to take care of my mom. She had MS, and I was home a lot. So it was easy. Wow. The flexibility of coming and going. I kind of started to teach a little bit, and then that took off into its own thing because I started to write drill. I mean, I started doing band camps. You guys know band camps. You have technicians, right, that teach on the field and stuff. Yes. And when I was working with a couple of those groups during their camps, the drill writer for the group was not really kind of finishing up the show or didn't get enough done, and I would say, "Hey, I'll do it." So at night, I would kind of pick up the pen and paper. At the time, we did it on pencil and big graph paper, and I would write a couple things, because the whole idea of the problem solving of where you have to place people and how to get them there kind of fit well with my background in terms of mathematics and computer science and how to kind of figure out problems. I mean, I kind of think of drill writing as problem solving. You know, so
Yes.
you gotta kind of get the instruments in the right place so the band plays together. You have to place the appropriate instruments in a certain place so they can be heard and featured. So it's a set of logistics that you have to play with that has limitations. You got your score and your music. That's your limitations on how you have to present the musical structure. And my primary role as a designer would be to make sure everybody can play together so we don't have any issues with the sound coming through. That's not my primary goal, is so that when it goes on the field, we can all say 1, 2, 3, 4, we can play, we'll sound good, and everything sounds balanced. That's a challenge in of itself. That's one thing, and probably the most critical thing of a drill designer for a marching band is to make sure those things are in place. So yeah, so I kind of I started doing that while I was in drum corps. I started to actually start teaching marching band once I kind of aged out, and I taught the cadets for a number of years. I actually was with that organization for, I'm back with them now, but it'll be 30 years I'm involved with that organization as a performer, as a technician on the field, as a designer for 20 years. And then I just kind of left that post in 2015. I'm back with them this year as a consultant, kind of mentoring one of the guys that I taught as a student. You know, I got a student involved with the cadets last year to fix their end of their show, and I kind of got him the position this year because I kind of feel like I need to give back, and I'm doing the same thing that somebody who did for me 25 years ago with the cadets mentored me in my first time. I'm doing that again with another person to be the next visual voice for a drum corps. So that's a special honor, you know. And I know I'm bouncing around here in terms of chronologically of where we get to where we're going, but
yeah, that's all right.
I think it's a good story. I think it's like something that I take away from it is that I've invested my life in the pageantry arts, and I'm happy at this point to be able to give back with helping somebody else, take the steps to becoming a designer or becoming, an important role for an organization that meant something to me. And I think there's something to be said for that. And I think you guys, as you kind of grow up and you realize when you're out of high school, you go to college, you get a career, you have a family, that there's some point in your life you want to say to yourself, you know what can I do to help somebody along the way that may have helped me? Hopefully you'll look back on the people who helped you, and at some point it will click in your mind. It's like, I should help somebody else, So I've been in that position for a number of years with different people for the activity, but it's fun to kind of do it at the home base where I spent, 30 years of. And, that drum corps has gone some ups and downs over the last 5 years. So I'm kind of happy to be there to help bring it back to where it was, So I was all set to be a computer programmer after I graduated college, pretty much. And so that was what I was doing. I can really pinpoint a crossroads in my life that if I decided to do one thing, I would have been this totally different person, or if I decided to do another thing, I became that person. And it was a decision I had to make because I could have easily been a computer programmer. At the time when it was a big deal, like. You guys don't notice, but there was a time where we didn't have these computers and devices that we were looking at each other and able to communicate. And I was like in the late 80s when this whole thing, personal computers, finally got into the home. It just started like in the late 90s, so this wasn't an everyday thing. I was kind of involved in my learning career, learning how to program and learn how to process. And that was like the big wave of when this thing blew up. So I didn't actually go that route. Unfortunately, I probably would be living on an island with 3 homes
Probably
around the world. But that's not the choice. But I wouldn't change it because it's something my passion drove me in a certain direction, and I'm kind of proud of that. But it's one of those things where you kind of make those decisions on where it makes you feel the best, where it makes you feel like you belong, and you can make a difference in people's lives. And I think I've done that, with my choices. Yeah. As I was starting to teach drum corps right after I aged out when I was 21 years old, I not only did I teach drum corps, I also taught marching band. And I also started to write for marching band because, you know, those jobs where I was kind of helping out and filling in and writing some stuff, you know, those things turned into opportunities. So things turned into, you know, other people saying, hey, you can kind of do this. Would you like to try? You know, so somebody gave me a break, and I started writing my first band show like really early, like probably when I was 20 years old. You know,
Wow.
so it kind of happened that fast. And my thing was like, and this is something that I tell designers now, or people first starting out in any sort of career, don't overwhelm yourself. You know, pick one
Mhm.
thing that you're going to do, and focus on it and kind of do it well. Don't kind of take a lot on at first. Like, you got to hone your skills. So you got to take baby steps before you can take bigger steps and before you can run. And a lot of young designers right now, you know, want to say, oh, I got like 5 bands that want me to write their show. I says, well, how many have you done before this? Oh, just I've been doing it like 1 or 2. I said, well, you're gonna have a hard time because
Yeah.
it takes a lot of effort. And you know, there's a lot of groups out there that have a lot of bad drill and bad design because I think there are people that, you know, want to jump in really fast and don't want to take the time and effort to really understand the craft and the skills that need to be honed in order to do that. And I did this all by hand at first. I mean, it was like I think Mrs. Benford was showing some design paper up there a second ago,
Mhm.
where we kind of like we wrote on it was like, what is it, like 17 by 11, right? It's big paper, and you did it by
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
And you know, you had a pencil, so like the whole side of my hand used to be full of lead, and it was erases all over the place. But the time it took to actually do that, you know, it took a long time because you had to draw the whole shape. And you know, Round Rock is a huge band, right? Like, can you imagine if you had a chart and dot every single person on the page, you know,
Mhm.
and then you had to put their number, you know, you had to check it from the other page and make sure you didn't skip one, because if you skip one
Oh.
and you're all off and you're going to erase it again, it was very time consuming. And it was one of those things that, you know, like once you kind of drew the pretty shape, or you kind of like had everything where it's supposed to be, it was like in stone. It's almost like you chiseled it, you know, and you didn't
Yeah.
want to kind of move it. So like when you went on to the next page, and these are all sequence of events, right? You guys know when you watch the video, you see a page, but there's a transition between that one page and the next page. And it's almost like if it's an 8-count phrase, there's 8 little pages in between that you develop, right? So like it's once you kind of write something down, it's kind of, you feel like it's set in stone. But that was a grueling task, but it got you to learn to kind of work in the medium and kind of understand how to move people. So, you know, actually now with the computer, it's much easier to kind of chart. And I think it's also much easier on the instructor side of it. And the directors, when they get that, they can see it full fledged on what it is. It's not something that's created in someone's mind that you're putting down points in time. And you know, like obviously you spend so much time with it, you can see the development, you know what it is because you thought about it. But for the educator and the person who actually hasn't designed it or worked with it, it's kind of hard actually to kind of like figure out kind of what's supposed to happen. What are they supposed to do in these 16 counts? You know, we'll set it up, and you know, it might be a lot of instructions to get there. The whole idea of the computer and how we do it now definitely streamlines that for sure. So yeah, so like for me, as I was kind of growing up and learning my trade, I was teaching drum corps. I wrote from some marching band, and as I was doing that, I started to get involved even in the indoor arena, and I started writing for Winter Guard, which is like out of my skill set because I was a brass player, you know, I was a musician. So, you know, spinning the rifle and the flag and dance and all that stuff wasn't my thing. You know, my job was to create the overall design, stage performance on the floor. I actually ran my own group because I started with a group that had like a drum corps involved with it. So I started teaching brass, and I said, do you guys want to get involved with the Winter Guard side of it? So I saw it as an opportunity, and I realized that it wasn't being taught well. It wasn't where it should be. So I said, yeah, I'll do this, you know. And all along, you know, my thinking in this whole activity that I'm in, I kind of took it with a grain of salt, thinking like, could this be a career for me, or is this just a hobby that I'm doing, you know, thinking that I'm going to be doing something else and this will be in the back burner. It was always
Yeah.
that thing, because at the time I wasn't ever really worried about the financial side of it, because I wanted to do something I love to do. And I realized that, well, if this path works out, there'll be some point in time where it's going to make sense for me make it as a career, or I can switch over to do what I was doing before. Luckily, I had that luxury to make those options, and I wasn't pressured to kind of jump into something. Everyone had their own situation. So I was living at home, taking care of my mom, and so those finances of life weren't intruding on your decisions of a profession. So I was fortunate in that respect. But I definitely chose a path that I thought was good to me. I didn't really, I could have been a programmer. I could have did the 9 to 5 punch in the clock thing, working with somebody else. But I enjoyed the freedom of kind of freelancing and working with a lot of different groups. I get to work with you guys, and I have a couple other clients that I work with, different band programs. So it's fun to kind of like change that up. You have a different set of people you're working with. You have a different set of skill sets, different talent levels. Mm-hmm. So it keeps it interesting, and it always changes from year to year. Another thing that happens sometimes, I hear this from I have a lot of older brothers and sisters, and they always used to bust my chops saying, when are you going to get a real job? So my thing was like, I think I do have a real job. But I would hear them always complaining about other people in the workplace and things like that. Like, I enjoy all the people I work with. It's a variety of people I work with, but I enjoy all the differences of it, and I enjoy being able to help them realize, their programs in the truest sense. I get to sit at BOA and watch you guys perform and enjoy that you guys went through a process of creating something out of nothing, and then showing it off to the whole world and having people, stand up and cheer for you. I mean, I think that's kind of like the best feeling in the world. And
yeah, it is.
And you know what I mean? Like, and it's for me, after I write that last page and I send it to you, it's yours. You know what I mean? But it's fun for me because I get to watch it and say, I feel like I'm a proud papa when I'm up there and I'm watching, all you guys, bring to life, what I kind of, created on the page, and it's only one dimensional, so like when I design this stuff, it's in my mind and it's on the page, and I'm pulling all the information from, Frank Sullivan, who wrote the music, and Colin McNutt and Ian, all those guys that put their 2 cents in. And I got to kind of make it all into something else that we present. So it's a very fulfilling process for me to see it have a life, and then you guys blow the air into it. You blow the life into it and make it into something fantastic. So I couldn't be more thrilled with that process, and it makes me realize that I'm fortunate to be able to do something that I do really care for and love to do. So it's exciting for me, and my pathway through this has gone through all the elements of what goes on in this arena. I was teaching drum corps, teaching marching band. I started to teach Winter Guard, and that grew into the whole indoor scene, and it kind of made me appreciate what those performers do, since that wasn't what I do. So I had learned a lot about that. And I would actually stage shows where I would just watch. I didn't want to put any pressure on the people choreographing. So if you guys watch the color guard and they spin their equipment, usually marching band, you learn the drill and you put the work to it. But I kind of started to do it not backwards, but in a different way. I wanted to really highlight what the choreographers were trying to do, because sometimes those guys are adding to something that's there. So when I started doing it, I started to I didn't want to put any restrictions on them. So when I would choose music and stuff, I would say, all right, you guys, this section is going to be a dancing. They're going to have rifles here and sabers here. Just write it, and I would analyze it, and I would watch what they would work, what the choreography would be, what the written flag work or weapon work would be, and then I would design the staging to that. So there was no restrictions on what they wanted to do. So cool. What it taught me is I understood how they wrote it. I understood, what it took for them to do that. Now, I couldn't really do it myself. I couldn't actually spin the equipment, but I learned how the process of doing that was. And then it kind of brought a whole new light on how I actually present the color guard for high school marching band, because it is a different thing than the musicians. And usually, if you're not really familiar with that, you can kind of lose them. They can be an afterthought instead of being totally integrated within the program, which is what some of the better bands do. That there's a sense of unity from everybody. It's not just, you know, the wind section or the percussion section. It works as a symphony. So, you know, that was very helpful to me. And then I moved into writing for indoor percussion, which was, again, another thing that's not in my wheelhouse. You know, I've been around it a lot, and it's a whole totally different arena. I know down in Texas they do these things in the fall, right? Don't do these drumline shows that it's almost like they just play their music, right?
They do, yeah. A lot of it is standstill. There's a few that will do movement, but a lot of it is standstill, and they just play the book.
Yeah, but WGI had this whole facet of, you know, started off as winter guard and it turned into a percussion side.
Yep.
Which again, it's totally two different things. You know, they're kind of look alike sometimes. You know, like when you see them come in with the floor and the props, and
yep.
But it's totally two different things. One is the percussion side has its similarity to marching band because the performers create the music, whereas color guard, it's a soundtrack. So the expressive qualities are different for sure. Plus, you know, the percussion side definitely has a heaviness to it because it is what it is. Like they're playing battery instruments, and you know, there's a different feel to that. But again, that was another learning experience for me to kind of be able to do what I do in terms of creating shows and staging people and creating excitement through music and motion and stuff that again was invaluable. And I was doing it with again, some of the people that I worked with drum corps, so it was easy fit, you know. And then a few years later, the whole indoor winds thing kind of blew up too. That's kind of in its early stages right now, but it's interesting, you know, just having the wind players in the basketball court with the tarp and the props and stuff like that. And there's definitely a more expressive quality. It's more intimate. You're closer to them. There's definitely more of a dance idea to it as in conjunction to marching. But again, it's another avenue that creative, expressive through music that I'm excited to be part of. So all those facets, you know, definitely keep my year interesting, to say the least. You know,
yeah,
it's all different productions. So
yeah, and they all have their own seasons. They all have their own, you know, times of cycle. Yeah, when things start
moving along. So yeah, that's kind of how I kind of grew up with this. So I've been doing it since I've been involved with it since I'm 9 years old, and I'm 52, and you know, I don't see myself stopping because it's such a great thing to be involved with. And hopefully, like you guys, as you kind of make your way in the world through high school and college, can find something that you feel just as passionate about. And you'll you know, the saying is, you know, you do something you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. You know, so
pretty awesome. That's a great story, and just to be involved with it, especially your parents were involved with it. I didn't know that. That's really cool. And they said, "Here, you're doing this," because they knew it was going to be good for you, I'm sure. And they said, "You're doing it, whether you like it or not."
Yeah,
I think it's a smart choice.
I have 6 siblings, most of them all older, and at some point they were all involved in it too.
Wow.
So they've gone on to do other things, but it's interesting. You know, they always come back to it because it was their childhood. So I'm still involved with it. So it's awesome for them because they still feel connected to it. You know,
that's cool.
You know, so it's definitely awesome.
That's really cool. Well, I know that our kids are going to have questions and all kinds, and I want to give them a chance to ask. I wanted to, Mr. Sacktig, do you have other things that you want to talk about just up front before the kids ask questions, or?
So you know what? Let's start with questions, and maybe that will spawn off into different topics. You know, because there's a lot of different things we can talk about. You know, even in reference to, you know, that was my story. I can kind of give a big picture, but if we want to talk more of marching band specifics, we can do that too. But let's get some questions if that's good, and then we can kind of.
Absolutely. Yep, we can do that. Hey guys, if you have questions, put them in the chat. I'm sure that I won't get to all of them. Just because this is a conversation, we're going to go back and forth, and some things we'll talk about more than others. But here's a good one. Both fields, I think math and visual design, they seem very different. But in your experience, they boil down to the fundamental creative mathematics concepts.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a creativity involved in terms of like, building something from nothing, creating a visual presentation where nothing exists. The interesting thing is like, so the music, 99% of the music you guys play is an arrangement of something that was created by somebody else. It's a composition, that those guys are working off of and making it, tailoring it to the needs of marching band in terms of effects and things like that, and the smaller time constraints. You work within like a 9-minute show, 8-minute show.
About that. Yeah, usually. Yeah.
Some of these things are taken off of like, 20-minute productions, 30-minute productions, and we kind of close them down. Frank Sullivan does write original stuff too. But I would say most of marching band is around that. The visual side of it and all that stuff comes from nothing. Like there's no basis of where we're creating this stuff from.
Right. Huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So it comes from nothing. So it's purely like, what you see on the field as you want to express is open to all ends. Now there is a technical side of it in terms of, understanding space and time and the basics of how we move from one set to the other, right? There's a certain step size that kind of goes with the music, right? And you have to kind of know what that is. You have to understand that, for me to go from here to there at 8 counts, if I'm asking you to go 4-yard lines, we all know that's impossible, right? If you're standing on the 50 and the drill move is 8 counts and you got to get to the 30, you're going to try that and you're going to be running 2 to 5, right? Pretty much, something like that. And you can't play, you don't even hold the horn up, right? You just got to run like crazy. So that's like improbable, right? So there's a method of understanding motion and how it relates to the music and how it goes on the field. In the past, when you did that by hand, you had to understand that. You had to look at it. You had to kind of measure people one by one or endpoints one by one. The program helps because it does put on the top thing, like what's the biggest step size for someone. But that's kind of deceiving. So that's just in the simplest form of how to get from point A to B and be able to do it. And be able to do it successfully and be able to play your instrument, Now put on top of it how it moves. Does it kind of fit the musical interpretation? Like if something is aggressive, you may want to have a little bit of spark to it. You may want to actually go a little further so there's energy to it. Imagine you're playing something, driving eighth notes that seems like it's moving, right? And you're taking baby steps. If you're standing in like let's say we're in a block and we go bump, 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 and it's aggressive, and you take baby steps and it moves inches, right? That doesn't kind of match, right? So the idea of creating visual to music is to kind of match the intensity of what's going on. And that's just in terms of how you go from one place to the next. Now, taking the fact that you got a lot of people and they make shapes and pictures, right? So if something is aggressive, you might see them in a thicker set. If something is, lyrical, you might see them in a beautiful, pretty curvilinear set. If something is, through the composition, has a presentation of instruments, like, this is a trumpet feature, or this is, the woodwinds take this phrase, or the drums have this now. It breaks up how you present the group on the field in terms of like, who are you highlighting? There's a whole idea of like, who do you highlight? Who you kind of, bring to the center? Who do you kind of coordinate color guard moments with? So there's different things you think about as you go through the show to kind of interpret the music. And it's an ever-changing thing in that you kind of I have to take a step back and I listen to the whole production that we do, whether it's tune by tune or a whole show, and say, what do I want to do over the course of time? And we don't want to repeat ourselves, right? We don't want to be boring, right? Imagine if we stood in the same shape and for the same time and we did the same thing, or we kind of like ended up, when we're holding someplace that seems like it shouldn't. Why are we holding here? It seems like we should be doing something else. So you got to kind of have to pick and choose, like you're telling a story. Like if you write a composition, right, to the beginning, to the middle, to the end, if you're doing something like there's character developments, right? You read any kind of play, there's sense of like growth through that time. And you kind of start someplace and you go someplace as you read something and you kind of take a journey. It's the same type of thing as you kind of like describe a visual presentation on the field. So if I use some sort of method of motion and movement in like part one of the show, let's say, I'm not going to ever do that again because it wouldn't make sense to see that same thing or that same feel. you kind of want to mix it up as you go through the show. So it has a growth and a development from first note, first step to last note, last step, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thank you for explaining, just especially with matching the drill to the music. And that's something that a lot of students, they don't necessarily always think about at the beginning. They
Yeah.
think, I'm going to write some drill and just put everybody out there.
Well, that's the first step to learning, though, right? You know, like I'm a big believer in the Nike ad. Just do it. You know, like it may be awful, you know, but just do it. And that goes for anything. Like, don't be afraid to try something. You'll learn, and hopefully you learn something. I still learn. A lot of times, what I do at the end of my season with every show that I write is I'll go back over it and I'll kind of say, hey, what were the things that were successful, and what were the things that maybe not that successful, or something that if I ever get in this situation again, I should think about in a different way to make sure I don't make that same mistake again. It's always a set of decisions. Everything that I do, every page that you see that you get, like, you know, I think it went to 80 something last year. I can't even remember. But, you know, how were choices, were decisions that took you down a certain way. And it may have been right for the moment. But, you know, when it's all said and done, the best thing that you can do is, after the dust settles and after it's out there and performed, if you go back through it, just check it off and say, oh, that's good. I like that. If this situation presents itself again in the future at some point for this band or any other band, you know, maybe you can make some better choices at that time, for whatever. And I think that's a good learning tool, you know, for anything you do. You know what I mean? Like, as students, as you're going through, you know, your classes, or, you know, if you're working on something and when it's all done, you present it, you know, your paper or whatever you're doing, like, when it's all said and done, if you go back for a second and say to yourself, you know, let me just go through this one more time and think about if did I make all the right choices, and if not, it's good to take note. It's good to kind of just, and then, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's not like a negative thing. It's just something to say, hey, you know, I could have kind of maybe did this better. And if the opportunity in the future presents itself, I may think differently. You know, I think you'll find that helpful as you grow.
Yes, I love that. Here's a specific one. What do you find is the most difficult aspect of the drill writing process? That's a good one.
Well, I gotta say, like, I'm not sure it's the most difficult, but definitely the very first page. Like the very first page and where you're going. Because you know what? They're not individual pages. It's always like, you always work in sections. Like, so like what I do in the process is I have all scores. I have the wind score, percussion score, the pit score, and I listen to it like 1,000 times. So I know the music. I know the music just as well as the guys wrote it. Because I know all the parts. I know, and then I kind of make a little outline of like, okay, where am I going to go? That first arrival, what I want it to look like, you know? But usually it starts with the first page, because once you put that first page down, it decides it decides how everything goes. So I'll actually panic over, like, how do I want to start this? Because once it's rolling, it's a matter of then, like, moving where you're at, because it can be anything. Like the first page and the first thought and the first idea can be anything. So it's always hard to like say like, how do I want it to begin? You know, because, you know, do I want it to start like this? Or it's always so many choices. It's hard for me to kind of sometimes really say that's what I want to do. So, but once I kind of get it going, then it's a matter of like, you know, working through time in a linear process through the scores and understanding where I have to go. There's a lot of logistics involved, but there's also, I have to kind of take into account, you know, my job is to entertain, like the people in the crowd need to be kind of entertained, right? We want to make sure that they're coming to see a show, you know, like we're just dots on the page. You guys are just like, you're like farm ants. You're out there and you're doing, right? But the overall thing is like, we have a performance that people want to come and see and be enticed to be at, you know? So there's always that side of me that's like, you know, make sure I'm presenting in a certain way that A, the performance can do it, B, everything is staged appropriately so we sound well, and C, that someone's going to look at it and say, hey, I want to see that again, or wow, that was cool, look what they just did, you know? So those are kind of the three things that drive me. And then variety. make sure we're constantly changing it up, make sure there's a lot of variety throughout time.
That's awesome. Thank you. How much do you listen to the music before you start writing a drill? And then how long would it take you to get maybe a movement done?
Yeah, like as I said earlier, listening is a big thing. I really feel like, you know, music is motion. So like the music that's there has to inspire what you see, you know what I mean, and vice versa. The best things are when they really gel together. Like you can actually not you can turn the sound down and maybe watch the drill and say, you know, I can almost hear it. You know, to get that balance, it's awesome. So it's really representative of the music. So I really try to understand, you know, what Frank was thinking about, and Frank and I would talk about like his thoughts and some things. Like sometimes
Sure.
I'm talking about Frank Sullivan, the guy who writes the
Yep.
music. He has, you know, I know he's been doing it for a long time, and he writes in such a way that is to the idiom. So there are certain expectations. You know, there's certain kind of like he understands that, hey, I'm going to want to kind of move a little faster here, or he understands that, you know, we need to kind of be in a situation where trumpets are featured well. So I can see that through his score, and knowing him for years, I understand that. But I kind of want to make sure I can match the intensity of the composition, you know, to the original composer on what they were trying to say, because it's emotion, right? You listen to music, there's an emotion behind it for the most part, right? Whatever that emotion is you can go down, it's all the color of the rainbow, right? They're all different colors. And so my job is to say, okay, this moment is say the color red, right? You got to see red, you know, like, or this emotion is pretty pink. You got to see pink. How am I going to make you see pink? You know, if you kind of make it feel like that. So that's what I try to do. I try to match the visual presentation and development of time of the succession of motion, you know, to the musical structure. And if I do that, I think that's when it's well received. That's when someone in the audience can connect to it, or, you know, someone could say, I understand. It all comes together. So
Great. Let's see. Here's a great one. Do you have a drill move that can be considered as iconic Jeff Sacktig?
I don't know. I mean, I'm fortunate that there's a bunch out there, right? So like I scoured the videos, and you know, it's really kind that a lot of people over the last bunch of years keep posting them. You know, like there's a drill moment at the end of the Cadets 2008 show that is pretty awesome. Like the last minute and a half of it, that's it's sheer energy, it's sheer power. I think that piece was Vesuvius, the end of Vesuvius.
Okay. Yep. To Kelly, sure.
Was up there, and the development of transitions every 6 counts, you know, in time. And you know, the best part of it is that when that's all done, you get a football stadium of people up on their feet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Cheering for it. That's one of the ones that's out there, and you know, it's one of the ones where I looked at and I said to myself, you know, it's this is going to be good. This is going to be exciting, and that show kind of needed it. It was kind of the concept of that show was controversial to begin with, but it needed that last minute and a half to kind of like, you know, as I say, you know, when I kind of do this, you know, I get to the end of a show, I think of it as like, okay, I need to slam dunk. Where is the slam dunk here? You know, I'm throwing punches and I'm going to slam dunk. You know, those two moments at the end of the show for me, and maybe like an end of an opener. You know, there's usually the way shows are constructed. You know, like an end of an opener is something that like you put a stamp on it, and there's an aggression there that kind of makes a statement. And so my job is to make sure I slam dunk the ball visually. You know, and I have that same feeling when I get to the end of the show. And especially, you know, those drum corps that I write for the Cadets were, you know, the end of the show, you know, they played aggressive music and moved fast. So it was my opportunity to flex the muscles and kind of like, you know, they give me the ball and I got to slam dunk it. You know, I can't miss. You know, I can't catch it. You got to kind of give them what they want. So I would say that's kind of the best. That's kind of the one that stands out to me at 2008 Cadets. There's many of them. There's like. You know, there's a lot of things that Angel and Demon shows I did with the Cadets in 2011. That was awesome.
Yeah.
You know, you look at a lot of different endings of the Cadets through the years, and there's something special about all of them. And I would even say last year, you know, last 3 years, I was with the Carolina Crown, And the energy that we built at the end of that show last year was awesome. You know, that was a great show throughout. But again, it was one of those things where you kind of get to the point where the music is exciting. The development of the phrasing is great. It has a lot of gear changes. You know, it doesn't just sit there. It has a lot of, it goes someplace. Every 16 counts, it changes, and it just gets more intense and more intense. I think, you know, for me, some of the best combination of that is when, you know, Jay Bocook, who was arranger for the Cadets all those years, and Michael Clash, who has arranged the music, kind of come up with, like, you know, there's a building block of pacing and development towards the end of a program. If you kind of have those things that kind of, it changes gears, like it has like 3 parts to it, you know what I mean? It's like has something that sets you up, that you get excited, and then the next set of music kind of puts you on top. Wow, that's even better. And then there's one more that just like pushes it over the edge, you know? So I know that we've created things like that musically, and then I've kind of match those ideas visually to create that pace and excitement. So it's just a big crescendo that kind of like explodes. Like people say, it's, you know, it's, oh, it's like fireworks, or it's like, you know, if you ever see the fireworks show, right? So like the big thing that happens in the sky, right? All the little stuff, right? And then there's the big finale, right? There's like usually like the last, you know, 2 minutes of it or so is huge. There's all those things going on. The same thing like with, I think, finishing a show. If you can do that musically, build the tension and release and the pace to a certain point, and then you match the visual on top of that, it elicits a response from the crowd that is, you know, extremely positive. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with arrangers to do that and be able to express that visually.
When you can make it match music and visual, that's a 10 every time when they match. That's awesome. All right, here I had a good question. Did you have anybody that you was a mentor to you, and do you have anyone that you look up to or to aspire to be?
Yeah, so in my path through this, you know, it's primarily through drum corps, and I was teaching there, and when it was my opportunity to kind of maybe write, the guy that did it before me, Mark Sylvester, and he's of the lineage of George Singali, if you heard that name in drum corps. He was still with me when I kind of started writing. So he was still there as a program coordinator and still teaching. So I was fortunate enough to kind of have him there, and he would look over my shoulder and help me a little bit along the way as I was doing it. But he did it in such a way where it was never judgmental. It was never to the point of like, you know, do this. It was like, you know, he understood that I was developing, had skill, and he guided me along the way, you know, which was awesome, you know. It's funny because back then we would, as I said, we wrote by hand, right? And how I learned was when I was teaching the drum corps and Mark Sylvester was writing the drill, he would chart out the forms and stuff, and then the dots, he let like other people, he divvied out the work, you know, like, so dot it. So that's how I technically kind of learned. So I would dot the pages. And then one day he said to me, he goes, oh, are you measuring? You make sure everyone can get there? Are you measuring? I didn't know how to do that. I just threw dots in with the space, you know? And so that's how I started to learn a little bit of what that was. And it's funny because when I kind of took over, he said to me, Jeff, you want me to chart a page for you? Now I'm a little anal, I'm a little protective, you know? So I said, sure. I gave him a page. Unfortunately, he spilled coffee on it and burnt the edge of the page. So I said, no more. You know, no one's gonna touch it again. So no one did that. But it's a different personality. Like he's definitely like, he's an artist. Like he's a painter and stuff. And you know, the type of personality he is, he's like molding clay. Like back then, you would learn some charts, and there would be like big phrases. There'd be like 24 or 32 count phrases, and a lot of the time, you would kind of set it up, and like you would kind of stop in between, and they would physically go out and say, no, move over here, write that dot down. You know, and then go to the next thing. So like for him, it was very tactile. He's like, you know, the actually learning was less of like design on paper and then send it and it works the first time. It was like, you know, you get it out there and then you kind of mess with it, you know, whereas when I took over, I saw that it could be more efficient if I did more of the work on the front end. So the student would have an easier time learning. Like, can you imagine, Mr. Mobley, can you imagine if you had to like, you know, had a 32 count phrase and you had to put subsets in between all of them?
No, I can't. No, I can't. It would take us forever in a day to learn, you know, 3 pages.
Yeah, move 300 kids.
All those small, yeah. It's
Yeah.
too much. Those phrases are so long.
That's how it used to be, though. That's how it used to be. They used to kind of like, they were longer sets, and it was just kind of like, you would have to go and say, oh, stop on count 8. All right, let's set, hey, go around, pace that off in 2s, check those paces, write that dot down, go back, do it, spray it, and then
Wow.
go to 30, like 32. Okay, stop on 16. Okay, let's put that in. Everybody, like people would pace it off, and so that's how they would kind of figure things out. That's a long time ago. Like
Sure. Yeah.
we have grown with technology has helped that too, but also just I think our attention span changed too. Like like right now, nowadays there's instant gratification. You got everything's at your fingertips. There's so much stimulus now.
Yeah.
Back then it wasn't like that. It was like we would play the long extended phrases of music. Marching band, we seem to kind of condense it down, but there would be more of a sense of journey instead of like, hey, what's exciting here? Hey, what's exciting there?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A little different. Yeah, Mark Sylvester was definitely my mentor, and that's kind of how I kind of learned how to do my craft. And as I said, through the years, there's been other designers that I taught through the cadets that went on to do great things.
Oh yeah.
That I've been involved with, and I'm luckily right now that I'm actually in that position as a consultant back with the cadets, with someone that I taught in the late 90s who was on my staff, who is talented enough to kind of handle that job, and I get to kind of like check in with him. I get to he sends me the drill charts, and we're on design call, and I said, hey, you may want to think of this. And again, it's totally up to you, but I think these are the choices that you may want to help. So I do have someone
cool.
that. And there's a few like that. Like there's a couple different names that I've kind of worked with through the years that I look after here and there. So
That's awesome. Well, you've got an incredible story, a great story, great background, and so much to offer the whole activity. We've got to close for now. We got to finish up for today.